Hello everybody, we are working on the chapter 15 exercises tonight. We are at the top of page 569. And one of the first steps that we have to do here is, instead of creating all the code for this project from scratch, they're actually encouraging us to use the start version of the code that's provided with the source code from the book. If you go to the resources page of our course shell, you can find resources to go to the publisher's website, pull down the zip, unzip it, find chapter 15 exercises, and find the start version. And I've already done that here on my machine and unzipped it and placed it in my Spring 2018 folder. You can see the folder right here. It looks like it's a couple folders deep. And they're going to want you to open up the project. So they want you to open it up by choosing the solution file. Disclaimer, of course, this was created in Visual Studio 2012. And we're working with 2017, so there might be some issues. I have not tried this in 2017 yet, so I don't know what those issues are, so they might happen on the fly, but that's always entertaining to watch your instructor stumble with stuff if necessary. But I'm just going to go ahead and open it, having faith that for the most part it should open okay. All right, is this from a trustworthy source? Gee, I hope so. It's not like I created it. The jQuery files? Well, that's an interesting question to ask, because look what version of jQuery is already in here. We're going with whatever's there. Am I going to go through the process of upgrading this? No, I don't see the point. We're just going to go with it as is. All right, so I successfully accomplished the first step. I'm now going to pull the book off to the other screen here, get it out of the way, as I normally do. And they want you to begin by actually looking over the default HTML file. And they have a printout of it up on the screen. And what they're basically doing is well, you're opening up some other project that's already built, you better take a look and see what you're dealing with. So that's what I'm doing. So we have a basic HTML5 document here. You can see we have a CSS, jQuery, and a JavaScript file created. Looks like we have a container for the page, we got a header section, and then we also have a table. Seems to have some rows and columns, and then we have a bunch of input fields. Looks like a form for first name, last name, email, phone number, and a button that says save. Okay, pretty simple little setup. Next, they would like us to go and take a look at the CSS file, and the CSS file for this project is in the content folder. All right, so you can see they have a universal selector that they're applying some basic settings. They have the HTML5 display block stuff in there to make sure the stuff renders correctly. For the most part, that's probably not needed anymore. And just some basic styles to kind of get some visual complexity to the page. That was step number 3. That was pretty easy, right? Can you guys see why I lectured you so much today? And do we have all the same CSS? Yeah, we sure do. Next, they want us to look at the JavaScript file. This is not a lot of coding, is it, folks? This is better than copying and pasting it and typing it. And this is pretty simple as well. Notice we have a reference to the jQuery, the version that's already included with the project. There's a document ready function which runs the namespace, the contact's namespace, and initializes it. And then you see below we actually have a function, an anonymous function, that's unnamed. And this is kind of fascinating because a lot of what's happening here is really what we're doing is establishing via namespaces, kind of like a class and object structure using JavaScript is really what we're doing. I was reviewing a new HTML book with one of our other instructors, Saad, just a couple days ago, and it's got a published date of 2019. And we were kind of leafing through it and checking it out, see if it's a good book. And we were both floored that we saw that JavaScript is now going to start adding a class descriptor to the language. You know what that means, folks? That means that JavaScript is becoming a real object-oriented programming language all of a sudden. For all I know, it's already operational in the browsers, but I was not aware of it. We both found it to be a really exciting development. And what that really means long-term in the future is that we would not have to do some of this namespace stuff to simulate a class or an object, that we would actually just create one, which is pretty exciting. All right. Now that we've looked at that one, now we're actually going to do some work. So we're on step number 5. We're at the top or middle of page 573. And what they would like us to do is right below this curly brace and semicolon, right in this spot right here, is add a new function. And this is the function that is going to actually allow us to interact with the storage. And I want you to kind of tie together what we were talking about prior to this video starting about how these local storage mechanisms work. And remember what technology I told you was driving it all? JSON. And notice here, as we're working with storage, what format are we using? JSON. That seems to be becoming that universal format. Thank you to JavaScript, and thank you to the interoperability between just about every programming language. Because really, it is just straight text. This is kind of an interesting little thing here because it has a lot going on in a very, very short little amount of code. Notice what the function is called that's retrieved from storage. So we're going to be pulling things in from where we have it stored and pulling it into an object. And then the return for this function, notice that has a conditional if statement. You guys, I want you to make sure you recognize that this is basically an if statement. So if there is stuff in storage, then we're going to parse it as JSON. That's what that means. That means we're going to read it in as a JSON file. Otherwise, we got an empty array. It's a pretty simple little function. Now, the interesting thing is step number 6 has some instructions. Excuse me. And it says populate the grid by iterating through the results array and creating a row for each record. Okay, and what that means is the JSON information is going to read in as key value pairs, and there's going to be multiple key value pairs that where the keys are going to be the same, but the values are going to be different. And even though that's kind of redundant, it will read in, ultimately we're going to kind of force it into a table format so that we can manipulate the data. All right. Step number 7, we don't actually have code to add there, but it says step number 7, we are going to add a little bit. So take a look at bottom of page 573, and I'll just pull it over for just a sec here. And notice the changes that we need to make, because what we're going to end up doing is with the results that come back, we're actually going to be building content and writing HTML, but we're using kind of a format which, depending on how you learn the technology, like you learn this technique very often in PHP classes, probably usually the first spot where you learn it, where if you're using a server-side language to create HTML output, you can actually take all the stuff and build it piece by piece and keep appending it to a variable, and then when you're all done, you can output that variable all at once as one big chunk of HTML. So the tip that we're doing that here is that we're setting up a variable called HTML. That's what, an empty string. And then as we go through our loop, we keep building table rows and data cells and adding HTML content based upon whatever stuff that we've pulled in from the JSON, and then plus equaling it or appending the text to the HTML variable, and then at the end we will take that HTML and just do one little output statement, and you have the whole HTML generated. Kind of an interesting approach. All right, so what we need to do is get this code into that file. So resuming with step number 7 here after our break, we need to get our code to look like this. Now, I know that you guys can look at the completed version of the code, but I do want to point out some things that I think are interesting in this code. Because we talked about how they're building up the HTML, and I want you to see how they're kind of handling it at the end. Are you guys noticing that there's like an OR statement here in the JavaScript? That's kind of weird, right? How does that work? Well, basically the way that this reads is the HTML will equal HTML, which is all the stuff that we're putting together in this loop, or it's just going to be a row, a table row that says there's nothing in there. So when would that trigger? If nothing goes into the HTML. So if it stays an empty string, it results as false, or, isn't that cool? I think that's really very clever little JavaScript. And it's a conditional statement that's really placed inside of a variable assignment. So the variable assignment is based upon true or false, and there's no like if statement that follows or for loop that follows or anything like that. So I think that's why it's kind of neat little code. But JavaScript allows for that to happen. We do need to get this code into our application. And then what I'm doing is, and you guys might want to try this technique at home, I have actually the completed version of the code in my Notepad++ on my second screen. And the reason I did that is because reading the instructions, the way that they have us build this code, it wasn't always clear to me what order I should put them in. And then you can argue, well, does it really matter? I guess maybe not, but sometimes it does. So I have the completed code on my one screen and the code I'm working on the other screen, and that way I don't have to type anything. I'm just copying and pasting it all directly in, but I'm still going through the mechanics of it so I can see how it works. And that's really the technique here, folks. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to place that, at least for right now, right in this area. It might end up being moved around, but for right now it's in there. Just copy and paste directly from the book. All right, let's move on to the next step. So now we're on step number 8 on 574. They also need to put together a function that's going to be called load contact. So let's drop that in right here. And notice how they're applying the namespace. We have another one called display current record. That was step number 9. And then we're on step number 10 here, where they have one single line of code, and that needs to be added to the end of the method that we created earlier. Now, I'm not really liking how the book describes this, because for me, it's not really clear where to place it. I don't know if you guys are feeling the same thing on that. So actually what I'm doing here is I'm figuring out where does that line of code go, and what they mean is this bind to grid method. So let's find that one. And so what they're saying is it needs to be added down here. Now I don't know if you guys are noticing or not, but I just copied it into memory, and I'm noticing that because I copied it from my text file, it's already there. You guys seeing that? Okay, so I didn't need to do that. Just pointing it out. Step number 11, we are now going to adjust the display function. So where did that one go? There it is. Or did I miss that step? Yeah, I'm not seeing that. Unless they renamed it, because the display display current record, right? Yeah, I must not have copied that one in. So let me go find that one. Yeah, I overlooked that one. All right, so let's copy that in. Then we also have a save function. I'm just going to add that one down towards the bottom here. And then that save function is going to be expanded. So we have this first part of it, and then we're going to add some more inside here. All right, if you've done that step, then we're going to move on to step number 14. And we're going to update the initialize method, which is up near the top here somewhere, to actually have some code inside of it. So it reacts to a click for saving. And then I like what they do in step number 14 is, just in case you didn't figure out where to paste stuff into, you can just go to step number 14 and get all of it at once, right? And the smart ones just go right to that one and copy the whole thing. I hope I didn't say that too loud over here. There's nothing wrong with that, and I'm not expecting you to code this stuff from scratch, but to take a look at it. So at this point, for that step, you want to make sure that everything at least is in the correct format and in the right spots. So take a moment to do that. Once you've done that, go ahead and save this document. And then, of course, we're going to go through the process of setting default as our start page. Just doing that with a right click. And then we are going to run it and see what happens. So I want you to remember here conceptually what we've done is we are going to put a form together that's going to take our information and store it, but store it locally. And as we do that, what we're going to do is we're going to use that inspect tool like we were looking at before this video started and look at the stuff that's stored locally in your machine and see if we can find what we just put in there. Okay? So let's give that a shot. Let's go ahead and hit the run button. Oh, wonderful. Do a control F5. Anybody else getting the same issue? Of course, it's my solution file. So what's my fix, Colleen? Okay, so I should delete my solution file and save the solution over again? Yeah. Because it's not going in the right spot. Right. So should I close my solution for it? Okay, so what do you suggest I do? What's my procedure? If you seem like you got this down to a science. It's not a bad thing. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go to where that's located. Of course, it comes up on my other screen here. let's go ahead and just delete that. And in fact, I'm also going to delete that, the secondary solution file. It's like a backup. And then I'm going to go ahead and open that. Wasn't the right thing to do, was it? As you guys watch me do all this, right? Here's my solution. Yes, I need help. Thanks. This is a good sign, actually. Right. Not a good sign. Yeah, I didn't save it to the right folder. So you got to do this all again? You got to be lighthearted about this, folks. But it's easy to say for the teacher whose grade doesn't count on it, right? There's a different kind of stress that you guys get when it's like all of a sudden it's got to be done and turned in at a certain time. At least now we know where our files are stored. Right, but where's the solution file? It's in Documents. Oh, it's in the app. Is it in app data? You guys know this trick, right? Or is it just right off the users directory? Thank you. So it's a whole lot of rigmarole just to get something to open up in your browser, right? That looks like a good spot. Now it's going to work, right? Just make sure it's set as start page. Oh, I know what the problem is. You guys see this little extension here? This is stuff I shouldn't record into the video. So people watching the video, normally I don't include this kind of fumbling. I'm going to try running it here again real quick. I'm actually going to delete the web config files and close the solution. I'm messing with it too much is what's going on now. No, it's horribly broken. I'll try one different approach. So that time I created no solution file, right, Colleen? I'm going to go one folder deeper. I like that better. Alright, so I need to fix my path. Alright, so I'm actually launching it directly from my file system now, folks, because I was fumbling with Visual Studio so much. So I'm going to try to put some information in here and see what it does. Should probably put numbers in there, right? Right. Now this is without Visual Studio running its web server, so for whatever's going on internally there, maybe it's like old versions of something or other that I'm importing. But you can see very clearly that I was able to take some information and type some stuff into the form. Should probably use some different letters now, right? This is a pretty slick little thing because we are not using a server. So I was kind of promising you before too that we should take a look at this. Inspect tool, go to the application tab, and try to figure out where is this stored. Is it in a database? No, that's not what we were using here. We were using local storage. So we should be able to expand through. And then my question for you is, who the heck is Bird? I don't know. Those are from something else. But it has to do with, actually I know exactly where it's from. These are from locally stored other applications that have run off of this file system. So if I had gone to like Facebook or some other URL, it pulls back all the stuff that's stored locally on my machine. So these are all things that are stored locally on my file system from other locally stored web applications. But you can see the one that's highlighted right now is contacts, and you can see the format, and then down at the bottom you see the data I just typed in. Pretty slick. Where is it stored? Local storage. So this is really, even though it took a little bit of like code copying and stuff, it's just basically to demonstrate that capability that we can store stuff locally now. So that, folks, concludes this chapter's exercise, I believe. I don't think there's any more. Very simple example of doing local storage. And something that actually, this is neat enough where you can store something locally, where if you have an idea for an application that you're building, that it would be helpful for you to be able to take stuff that a user's doing and store it locally on their file system. Here's a nice little example that you could leverage to do exactly that. What kind of thing might you use it for? You guys noticing the other things that exist on my local file system here? What do they all look like? games. What kind of stuff would you want to store on somebody's machine? Well, if you wrote an HTML5 game, you might want to score their scores. It's just a thought. All right, folks, that ends this one, and we're going to move on to the next chapter.